Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Weekly What's Up on Bode photo and video section. Each week we talk to one of our instructors here on Bode to tell us a little bit about what they've been working on. I've got David Bode here to tell me a little bit about his massively awesome and huge, full of interesting course on Introduction to Video Editing. Hey David, how are you?
Doing fine, Shruti.
So this course is pretty interesting. It's an entire course on how to video edit. Tell me really quickly what you're doing with it and how you approached it.
So this is an introduction to video editing. So it covers a lot of different things, from what is video editing to what different shots are, how to go through the entire workflow process of ingesting and organizing, trimming your clips, adding them to the timeline, refining your edit, what the different edit tools are, rolling edit, slip edit, etc., and how to apply some basic effects and how to get it out of your editor and into the real world so that someone else can watch it. So it's a soup to nuts, if you will, look at video editing.
Very interesting. So do you use a specific program for this course?
I sure do. The course is using HitFilm, and that's a program that's new to me, but what's cool about the course is that the skills that you'll learn in this course work across almost every video editor that I've seen. My primary video editor is Adobe Premiere, and not only do things look very similar in HitFilm compared to Premiere, but a lot of the shortcuts are the same, and no matter what video editor you use, whether it's Premiere, Final Cut, Avid, or something else, the process is going to be exactly the same of how you get the video in and trimming and adding them to your timeline. So even though I'm using HitFilm, it doesn't really matter what you use. You're going to learn the process of video editing because the concepts are the same.
So one of the interesting things that I read about this course that you did is you talk about the emotional and psychological level of video editing. Tell me a little bit about that.
So in the course, I go over why you do the things that you do when you're making cuts and what are the kind of thought processes that you go through and how that affects the end product. A lot of times, I know for me, in my own experience, it's not something that you may be consciously thinking about, but once you understand the concepts, the why and the how make a lot more sense. So for example, the most important thing is emotion. So you make cuts and everything else essentially boils down to driving the emotion, what you want to get your audience to feel. Now, sometimes that is not, some big dramatic emotion, but for example, one thing you don't want them to feel is confused. So you want to make sure that you're making choices that are logical and they make sense. And then all of the other kind of thought processes that go into making choices when you're video editing fall along those same lines, and they all kind of support each other. So things like rhythm and pacing and eye trace, all of those kind of work towards the same thing, is to get your audience to feel what you want them to feel, and it kind of guides your decision-making process when you're video editing. And so I talk about that, and hopefully that will shed some light onto why you make a particular cut when you do.
Interesting. So did you have some sort of emotional or psychological level when you were actually doing this course? Because it looks like you put a lot of thought into this. So was it challenging when you had to come up with all of these ideas?
Well, no. What I have done is what a lot of folks have done is I have stood on the shoulders of those who have went before me. And this whole idea that I'm talking about is something called the Rule of Six, which is talked about by a guy named Walter Murch, who's an Oscar-winning director and sound designer and film editor. And he's written a book that goes into detail about all of these things, and it's called The Rule of Six. And so I basically go over that and explain that, and then I show how to do that in the examples in the course, kind of putting the video together, and you'll kind of see the theory, if you will, in action as we go through the course.
Very exciting and interesting. Now, another thing that I took away from your course when I was looking over it is that you also come up with a lot of sort of guides. You know, there's this whole vocabulary of shots and cuts, and there's also a whole section on talking about ingesting and you know, making sure that everything's organized and putting things into your timeline. So, tell me about those two processes that you did in this video or in this course.
Sure. Those are what I would consider the words, the vocabulary of the trade. And that's something I think that's useful to know when you interface with other people who are doing, you know, new media sort of things. So we talk about the video workflow and the whole process, like I mentioned before, ingesting your footage, trimming, organizing, adding your clips to the timeline, and how those go in order. And I explain things as much as I can so that when you're talking about your edit or you're describing it to a client, you can use the right vocabulary and it makes sense to everyone. It kind of puts everybody on the same page when you're talking about you know, your shots and cutaway and B-roll and the other processes involved in video editing. So all of those things are covered, and I think it should make sense to a lot of folks when you get to start talking to other people who may do graphics or audio, or when you start talking to the people who shot the video.
So give me an example of when you bring in the vocabulary. Do you kind of put it up on your video as well on the side so there's like a definition, or do you just talk about it?
No, I basically just talk as I'm going through. So as I'm doing things, as I'm pulling things in, we'll talk about the B-roll and the cutaway and why it works and kind of why you put it here and that sort of thing. So it's a learn by doing experience.
So personally, one of the things I want to know from you as a person who made this course is, what is the one thing that you would want to tell a viewer when they're watching this course? What's a piece of advice that you would give them when they're watching this course to keep in their mind?
Just that they can do it. You know, video editing can seem like something that's really overwhelming. You're learning a tool. I remember the first time that I opened up Adobe Premiere Pro. There's a lot of tools, and they may not make sense to you at first. You know, it's a wild interface, and there's a lot of windows that do different things. And so the advice that I would give to someone watching is just stick with it, because once you learn the essentials, which you will learn in this course, you can tackle pretty much anything.
Perfect. Thank you so much for talking to me about your course. I'm really looking forward for it. All right, that's all we have for this week's Weekly What's Up. I'll talk to you guys really soon. Bye.